My name is Amaya. I'm 29, and I never imagined my own family would betray me like this. After years of hard work, I finally bought my dream house 6 months ago. Today I came home early from a business trip to find my parents packing up all my belongings. They were getting ready to move me into a tiny studio apartment so my brother and his wife could have my house. When I realized what was happening, I just picked up the phone. Let me know where you're watching this from, and hit that like and subscribe button to find out who I called and how I handled this unbelievable betrayal. I've always been close with my family. Growing up in a modest suburban neighborhood, my parents taught us the value of hard work and family loyalty above all else. My father worked as an accountant, while my mother taught elementary school, and they raised us to believe that family supports each other through thick and thin. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough, and the love in our household made up for anything we lacked materially. From a young age, I showed artistic talent. I would spend hours drawing designing logos for imaginary companies and creating posters for school events. My parents encouraged this passion, though they always reminded me to pursue something practical as well. So when I went to college, I majored in graphic design, but also took business courses to ensure I could make a living. College wasn't easy financially. My parents helped where they could, but I worked 2 jobs while maintaining a full course load. I waited tables at a local restaurant on weekends and worked at the campus design center during weekdays. Sleep was a luxury I rarely enjoyed, but I was determined to graduate without crushing debt. After college, I started at the bottom rung of a marketing agency. The pay was barely enough to cover rent for the tiny apartment I shared with 2 roommates, but I was gaining valuable experience. I took on freelance projects during evenings and weekends, slowly building a portfolio and client base of my own. Those years were exhausting, but I had a dream that kept me going. I wanted to own a home. Not just any home, but a place that was truly mine where I could put down roots and create the stability I craved. Every extra dollar went into my savings account. While friends traveled or bought newer cars, I lived frugally and focused on my goal. When family members questioned why I wasn't prioritizing dating or marriage, I simply explained that I had different priorities for this chapter of my life. After 7 years of this disciplined saving and career advancement, I finally had enough for a down payment. By then, I had worked my way up to senior designer at my agency and had a thriving freelance business on the side. My income had grown substantially, and I was pre-approved for a mortgage that would allow me to look at some lovely homes in a family-friendly neighborhood not far from where I grew up. The house hunting process was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. I toured dozens of properties feeling discouraged when the perfect places were snapped up before I could even make an offer. But then on a rainy Sunday afternoon 6 months ago, I walked into the house that instantly felt like home. It wasn't the largest or the most luxurious property, but it had character and potential. 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen that opened to a cozy living room and a backyard with a mature oak tree. The previous owners had maintained it well, though some rooms needed updating. I could already envision the home office I would create in 1 bedroom and the guest room for when family visited. The master bedroom had large windows that filled the space with natural light, perfect for my early morning yoga routine. I made an offer that same day, and after some negotiation it was accepted. The day I signed the final paperwork and received the keys was one of the proudest moments of my life. At 28, I had achieved something significant entirely through my own efforts. My parents attended the closing beaming with pride as I signed the documents. My father hugged me afterward and said, "You've done what took us until our 40s to accomplish." Those words meant everything to me. The first few months of homeownership were a blissful whirlwind of painting walls, arranging furniture, and making the space truly mine. I hosted a housewarming party where friends and family gathered to celebrate this milestone. Even my younger brother Jackson seemed happy for me, though he had always taken a different path in life. Jackson is 2 years younger than me, but has always approached life with less direction. He's changed career paths several times, never quite finding his footing professionally. Despite this, our parents have always shown him unwavering support, often providing financial assistance when he faced tough times. I never resented this understanding that different people need different kinds of support. 6 months ago, Jackson married Stephanie after a whirlwind romance. Stephanie works as a nurse providing most of their financial stability, while Jackson has been between jobs again. They've been living in a rented apartment that stretches their budget, especially with Jackson only working part-time at a local sporting goods store. I've heard my parents discussing their situation with concern during family dinners, but I never imagined how those concerns would eventually impact me. My parents had come to visit for the week, ostensibly to help me with some home improvement projects. I had a business trip to San Francisco scheduled during part of their stay, but arranged things so we would still have several days together. The trip was for a major client presentation that couldn't be rescheduled, and I expected to return home the day after they left. However, my presentation went exceptionally well, wrapping up earlier than anticipated. The client loved my designs and signed the contract on the spot, eliminating the need for the follow-up meeting we had scheduled for the next day. Excited by this success and the prospect of spending one more evening with my parents before they headed home, I changed my flight and headed back early. The journey was exhausting despite my excitement. A delayed flight turbulence that prevented beverage service and a chatty seatmate who seemed oblivious to my subtle hints that I wanted to rest. By the time I landed and took a rideshare to my house, I was dreaming of a hot shower and my comfortable bed. Perhaps my parents would still be up, and we could celebrate my successful presentation with the bottle of wine I had picked up at the airport. As the car pulled up to my house, I noticed all the lights were on, which seemed odd for nearly 10 at night. My parents typically turned in early, a habit from their years of rising before dawn for work. The driver helped me with my suitcase and I thanked him, tipping generously despite my fatigue. As I approached my front door, I heard hushed voices inside. Thinking my parents might be watching television, I inserted my key as quietly as possible, planning to surprise them. But when I opened the door, what I saw stopped me in my tracks. Boxes lined the hallway, neatly labeled in my mother's precise handwriting. Amaya Kitchen. Amaya Books. Amaya Winter Clothes. Confusion washed over me as I stood in the doorway trying to make sense of the scene before me. Then I heard my father's voice from the living room. We should have most of her essential items packed by tomorrow. The studio is small, but she doesn't need much space since she's always working anyway. I stood frozen in my own entryway, unable to process what I was hearing. The suitcase handle slipped from my grasp, hitting the hardwood floor with a loud thud that announced my presence. Immediately, the hushed conversation in the living room stopped. Amaya, my mother's voice called out, surprise evident in her tone. Is that you, honey? I stepped further into my home, taking in the transformation that had occurred in my absence. Every surface seemed to be in some state of transition. My carefully curated bookshelf was half empty with stacks of my beloved design books piled neatly into a box. The framed photographs that had lined my mantel now sat wrapped in newspaper inside an open container labeled Amaya Fragile Items. What's going on here? I managed to ask as my parents appeared in the hallway. Their expressions a mixture of shock and something else I couldn't quite identify. Guilt, perhaps? You're home early? My father stated the obvious, running a hand through his silver hair. We thought you weren't coming back until tomorrow evening. Clearly, I replied, my eyes scanning the boxes surrounding us. That doesn't answer my question. Why are you packing up my things? My mother stepped forward, placing a hand on my arm that I instinctively pulled away. Now, sweetie, don't get upset. We were just doing some organizing for you. You've been so busy with work and your closets were getting cluttered. The explanation was so absurd that I almost laughed. Organizing. By packing everything I own into boxes, that doesn't make any sense, Mom. I pushed past them into the living room, where more boxes sat in various states of fullness. On the coffee table lay a stack of papers that caught my eye. Moving closer, I recognized a rental application for an apartment complex across town, known for its tiny studio units. Next to it was a printed email with my name in the subject line, apparently sent from my father's account to the property manager. We found the perfect studio for Amaya. the email read. She'll be ready to move in by the end of the month. Please confirm the lease terms we discussed. My stomach dropped as reality began to sink in. This wasn't organization. This was eviction. You're trying to move me out of my own house, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper as I turned to face my parents. The house that I bought, the house that I pay the mortgage on every month. My father cleared his throat, stepping forward with the authoritative posture he always adopted when delivering what he considered reasonable decisions. Amaya, please sit down. We should discuss this calmly. I don't want to sit down in my own home that you're apparently trying to take from me, I replied, hearing the tremor in my voice. I want an explanation. Just then my mother's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and whispered something to my father before answering. Yes, she's here. She came home early. I know it's unexpected. Maybe you should come over now instead of tomorrow. As she hung up, I demanded, Who was that? My mother's smile was strained. That was Jackson. He and Stephanie are coming over to help discuss everything. Discuss what exactly? I pressed through. I was beginning to piece it together from the overheard conversation and the rental application. My father sighed deeply, as if I was being difficult rather than reacting normally to finding my belongings being packed without my knowledge or consent. Amaya, we're doing what's best for everyone in the family. He began, using the reasonable tone he employed when explaining supposedly adult concepts to children. Jackson and Stephanie are starting their life together. They need space, especially now that they're talking about starting a family soon. And what does that have to do with my house? I asked, though I already knew the answer. This house is perfect for a growing family, my mother interjected. 3 bedrooms, nice yard, good school district. You're just one person, sweetheart. You don't need all this space. The casualness with which she dismissed my right to my own property left me momentarily speechless. I stared at her, this woman who had taught me to stand up for myself, now suggesting I should give up my home because I was single. We found you a lovely studio apartment, my father continued, picking up the rental application. It's in a secure building close to your office. The commute would be much better than from here. You're planning to move me into a studio apartment so Jackson and Stephanie can have my house, I clarified, needing to hear them actually say it. My mother nodded enthusiastically, seemingly oblivious to how outrageous this was. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? They need the space, you don't. Family helps family, Amaya. And when exactly were you planning to inform me of this decision about my life and my property? I asked, struggling to maintain my composure. My parents exchanged glances. We were going to tell you when you got back tomorrow, my father said. We thought it would be easier if we had everything organized and ready. You know how you get when things aren't presented with a clear plan. How I get? I repeated incredulously. You mean how I might reasonably object to being pushed out of the home I worked for years to afford? Don't be dramatic, my mother sighed. It's not like we're making you homeless. The studio is very nice, and we've already spoken with the landlord. He's holding it for you. I ran my hand through my hair, trying to process the magnitude of their presumption. How long have you been planning this? They looked at each other again, that silent communication that parents develop over decades together. We started discussing it a few weeks ago, my father admitted, when Jackson mentioned they were having trouble finding an affordable place big enough for their needs. A few weeks? I repeated slowly. You've been planning to move me out of my own home for weeks, and it never occurred to you to ask me first to see if I was okay with it. We knew you'd be difficult about it, my mother said with a small wave of her hand. You've always been so attached to your independence. Sometimes family needs have to come first, Amaya. Difficult. The word stung. Is that what I am for expecting basic respect for my property and my choices? For wanting to live in the home that I purchased with my own money after years of saving? My father crossed his arms. Amaya, you're almost 30 years old and single. Jackson is married and planning a family. Their need is greater than yours right now. That's just reality. The implication was clear, and cutting my life choices made me less deserving of my own home than my brother's traditional path. Before I could respond, I heard the front door open and familiar voices filled the entryway. We came as soon as we could, Jackson called out. Is everything okay? He and Stephanie appeared in the living room doorway, both looking surprised to see me standing there amid the boxes. Oh, Stephanie said, her eyes widening slightly. You're back early. The way she said it made it sound like I had interrupted something private, rather than returned to my own home to find a conspiracy in progress. Yes, I said flatly. I'm back early to find my family packing up my belongings without my knowledge or permission. Jackson at least had the decency to look somewhat uncomfortable. Amaya, Mom, and Dad explained everything to us. It really does make the most sense for everyone. Everyone except me, I pointed out. Stephanie stepped forward, her voice taking on that sugary tone she used when trying to persuade people at family gatherings. We would take such good care of the house, Amaya. I already have ideas for updating the kitchen, and the spare bedroom would make the perfect nursery when the time comes. I stared at her, astonished by her audacity. You're planning renovations to my house, a house you don't own, and that I haven't agreed to give you. Well, we assumed since your parents thought it was a good solution. She trailed off, glancing at my mother for support. Amaya, my father cut in firmly, this is what families do. They share resources and support each other. Your brother needs this house more than you do right now. And what about what I need? I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. What about the fact that I worked 2 jobs through college, saved for years while living with roommates, took on extra freelance work, and sacrificed vacations and luxuries to afford this house? Doesn't that count for anything? My mother sighed dramatically. No one is saying your hard work doesn't matter, but family circumstances change. We need to be flexible. Flexible, I repeated. You're asking me to give up my home, not switch dinner plans. You're being selfish, Jackson said flatly. Stephanie and I can barely afford our apartment, and it's not big enough if we want to start a family. You have all this space just for yourself. It's not selfish to want to keep what I've earned, I countered. And your financial situation isn't my responsibility. I made different choices, saved differently. It's always about your choices being better, isn't it? Jackson shot back. Some of us weren't able to focus solely on career for years. Some of us wanted an actual life. The implication that my life without marriage was somehow less valid hit a nerve that my family had poked many times before. My life is perfectly fulfilling, I said through gritted teeth. And it includes living in the house that I purchased. Just think about someone besides yourself for once, Stephanie interjected. We're family now, and family helps each other. I've helped plenty, I reminded them. I loaned Jackson money last year when his car broke down. I helped you furnish your apartment when you first moved in together. But this is different. This is my home. My father stepped forward, his expression hardening. Amaya, we didn't want to do this the difficult way, but if you're going to be unreasonable, we don't have much choice. The family has decided this is the best solution. The studio lease starts at the end of the month. We're helping you by packing now so the transition will be smoother. The family decided? I asked incredulously. I am part of this family and I wasn't consulted, and you have absolutely no right to make decisions about my property. Don't use that tone with your father, my mother admonished. We raised you better than that. You raised me to stand up for myself, I reminded her. That's exactly what I'm doing. You're being ridiculous. Jackson sighed, moving to continue packing one of the boxes. The decision is made. You'll see, this makes sense once you calm down. As I watched my brother casually placing my books into a box, something inside me snapped. The realization that they fully intended to proceed with this plan regardless of my feelings or rights was both shocking and clarifying. They truly expected me to simply comply to give up my home because they had decided I should. Stop packing my things, I said firmly. This is my house, purchased with my money, and I am not moving out. Amaya, my father began in his warning tone, the one he used when we were children and pushing boundaries. But I was no longer a child, and this was no longer his house where his rules applied. This was my house, my life, my decision. No, I said, cutting him off. This ends now. All of you need to stop packing immediately. We are not discussing this further because there is nothing to discuss. I am not giving up my home. For a moment, no one moved as if they couldn't quite believe I was seriously refusing. Then my mother shook her head and resumed wrapping one of my framed photographs in newspaper. "You'll thank us later," she said confidently. "Sometimes we need to make hard choices for our children, even when they're grown." As my family continued packing my belongings against my explicit wishes, I realized that words alone weren't going to stop them. They had already convinced themselves that their plan was not only acceptable, but somehow benevolent. My protests were being treated as a temporary tantrum that would eventually subside. I needed to take action to make it clear that this wasn't a family decision, but a violation of my rights as a homeowner. And in that moment of clarity, I knew exactly what I needed to do. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the house with an authority I didn't know I possessed. "Everyone stop right now." The command in my tone must have been startling because all four of them froze, looking at me with expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance. "You can't just barge into my house and decide to relocate me like I'm a piece of furniture." I continued, feeling anger coursing through me. "This is my house. I bought it. My name is on the deed and the mortgage. None of you have any legal right to pack up my belongings or make decisions about where I live." "Amaya, this kind of outburst isn't helping," my father said sternly. "We're trying to do what's best for the whole family." "No, you're not," I countered. "You're trying to take something that belongs to me and give it to Jackson and Stephanie because in your mind their married status makes them more deserving than me." "Well, they are starting a family," my mother interjected. "You're still single, focused on your career. Just like your Aunt Laura, always putting work first. And look how she ended up alone at 50. The comparison stung more than I wanted to admit. Aunt Laura had been held up as a cautionary tale in our family for as long as I could remember, despite the fact that she seemed perfectly content with her life choices. "I'm not Aunt Laura, and there's nothing wrong with her life either," I said firmly. "And being single doesn't make me less entitled to my own property." "You've always been too focused on your career," Jackson added, shaking his head. "Maybe if you had prioritized dating instead of working all those extra hours, you'd have someone by now." "Or maybe I was prioritizing financial security and independence," I shot back. "Which is why I can afford this house while you're struggling to pay rent." "That's enough, Amaya," my father cut in. "There's no need to be cruel." "Cruel?" I repeated incredulously. "You think I'm being cruel by defending my home while you're literally trying to displace me from it? Do you have any idea how backward that is?" "This house is wasted on just one person," my father insisted. "Jackson and Stephanie could make better use of the space." Stephanie nodded enthusiastically. "The guest bedroom would make the perfect nursery," she said, gesturing toward the room I had set up as my home office. "I'm thinking a woodland theme with soft greens and browns." The casual way she discussed redecorating my office, the space where I created the work that paid for this house, was the final straw. They weren't just ignoring my protests, they were continuing to make plans as if my resistance was irrelevant, a minor obstacle to their perfectly reasonable arrangement. "None of you are listening to me," I said, my voice quivering with anger and hurt. "I am not giving up my house. Not now, not at the end of the month, not ever. This conversation is over." My mother sighed dramatically. "Amaya, you're being childish. Sometimes in life, we have to make sacrifices for family." "Why am I the only one expected to sacrifice?" I demanded. "Why isn't Jackson sacrificing by finding a place he can actually afford? Why aren't you and Dad sacrificing by helping them with a down payment instead of trying to take my house?" "We don't have that kind of money," my father replied. "You know that." "So instead you decided to take what I worked for," I asked. "How is that fair or right in any way?" "Life isn't always fair," my mother said with that dismissive tone she used whenever I questioned family dynamics as a child. "Family takes care of family." "This isn't taking care of me," I pointed out. "This is taking from me." Jackson approached me, placing his hands on my shoulders in what I'm sure he thought was a comforting gesture. "Sis, I know this is hard, but try to see the bigger picture. Stephanie and I need stability to start our family." The studio apartment would be perfect for you, and you'd be helping us out enormously. I shrugged his hands off. If you need stability, find it without taking mine away. I worked for years to buy this house. Years of sacrifice and saving and extra work. And we're proud of you for that, my mother said. But circumstances change and we need to adapt. The circumstances of homeownership don't change just because my brother got married, I said flatly. My father's expression hardened. Amaya, I think you need to take some time to calm down and think this through rationally. We've made arrangements and getting emotional won't change the practical realities of the situation. What practical realities? I challenged. The only practical reality is that this is my house and I decide who lives in it. We're your parents, my mother said, as if that settled everything. We know what's best. I'm 29 years old, I reminded her. I make my own decisions about my life and my property. Stephanie, who had been relatively quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. I think you're being incredibly selfish, Amaya. Family should come first, and Jackson and I really need this house. The apartment we're in now is cramped and expensive, and the landlord just raised the rent again. I'm sorry about your housing situation, I said, and I genuinely was. But that doesn't give you the right to take my house. We're not taking it, Jackson objected. We're asking you to share the family resources. This isn't a family resource, I said, enunciating each word clearly. It's my personal property that I paid for myself. With opportunities that Mom and Dad gave you, Jackson countered. They supported your education, encouraged your career. Everything you have builds on what the family provided. Of course it does, I acknowledged. And I'm grateful for that support. But that doesn't mean I owe you my house. My father stepped forward, his patience clearly wearing thin. Amaya, we've made our decision. The studio lease is signed in your name with the first month's rent paid as a gift to you. We're going to continue packing your essentials, and by the end of the month you'll be settled in your new place. The finality in his tone made it clear they had no intention of respecting my position. To them, this wasn't a negotiation or even a discussion. It was simply an announcement of what would happen regardless of my feelings or rights. I watched in disbelief as my mother returned to wrapping my possessions in newspaper, as Jackson picked up a roll of packing tape, as Stephanie began making notes on her phone about furniture placement. They were going to proceed with their plan with or without my consent. In that moment, I felt something fundamental break inside me, the implicit trust I had always placed in my family, the belief that despite our differences, they ultimately respected me as an adult. That trust crumbled as I watched them casually dismantle my life and home, acting as if my objections were merely an inconvenient tantrum to be weathered. I reached for my phone in my pocket, my hand trembling slightly as a new clarity washed over me. If they wouldn't respect my words, perhaps they would respect legal boundaries. I had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to have my home taken from me, even by the people who had raised me. "What are you doing?" my father asked sharply as he noticed me with my phone. "Something I never thought I'd have to do," I replied quietly, scrolling through my contacts. "I'm calling someone who can help me protect what's legally mine." "Don't be dramatic," my mother scoffed. "Who could you possibly call at this hour?" I found the name I was looking for: Diana, my close friend from college, who had become a successful property attorney. As I pressed the call button, I looked each family member in the eye. "You've left me no choice," I said as the phone began to ring. "If you won't respect my rights as a homeowner, I'll have to enforce them legally." The expressions that crossed their faces ranged from shock to disbelief to indignation. They truly hadn't expected me to fight back with any real force, had assumed I would eventually capitulate to their demands as I had so many times before in family disputes. But this was different. This wasn't about holiday plans or family vacation destinations. This was my home, my sanctuary, the physical manifestation of years of work and dreams. "Hello?" Diana's voice came through the phone, slightly groggy from the late hour. "Diana, it's Amaya," I said, never taking my eyes off my family. "I need your help right now. My family is in my house, packing my belongings without my permission, planning to move me out against my will. Can you tell me what my legal rights are in this situation? As Diana began to explain the legal protections I had as a homeowner, I watched the reality of the situation finally begin to dawn on my family's faces. This wasn't going to be as simple as they had planned. I wasn't going to be as compliant as they had expected. And most importantly, I wasn't going to let anyone take away what I had worked so hard to achieve, not even the people I had spent my life trying to please. Yes, they're still here, still packing my things, I said into the phone, watching my family's expressions shift from determination to uncertainty. They've signed a lease for a studio apartment in my name without my knowledge or consent. Diana's voice came through clearly professional and authoritative, even at this late hour. Amaya, what they're doing is completely illegal. As the sole owner of your home, only you have the right to decide who lives there and what happens to your possessions. They have no legal authority to remove you or your belongings regardless of family relationships. I maintained eye contact with my father as I asked, "And what should I do right now to protect myself and my property?" "First, tell them explicitly that you do not consent to their actions and that they must stop immediately," Diana instructed. "If they refuse, inform them that you'll have no choice but to call the police to report trespassing and attempted theft." "The police?" my mother gasped, her hand freezing mid-wrap around one of my ceramic vases. "Amaya, you wouldn't dare call the police on your own parents." I covered the phone's microphone briefly. "I don't want to, Mom, but you're not giving me much choice here." "This is ridiculous," my father scoffed, though I noticed he had stopped packing. "We're your family, not criminals." I returned to my call. "Diana, they're claiming that because they're my family, different rules apply." "That's absolutely not true," Diana stated firmly. "Family members have no special legal right to your property. In fact, what they're doing could potentially constitute domestic abuse under current laws protecting adults from family exploitation." I took a deep breath and nodded, even though Diana couldn't see me. "Thank you. So you're confirming that I'm within my rights to have them removed from my home if they won't respect my wishes?" "Absolutely," Diana confirmed. "You have every right to ask them to leave your property immediately. If they refuse, calling law enforcement is a completely appropriate next step." "I appreciate your help," I said. "I may need to call you back soon." As I ended the call, I faced my family with newfound resolve. That was my friend Diana. She's a property attorney. She has confirmed what I already knew. This is my house legally and morally, and none of you have any right to make decisions about it or my possessions. "You called a lawyer on your family?" Jackson asked incredulously. "That's cold, Amaya, even for you." "What's cold is trying to force me out of my own home," I countered. "What's cold is packing up my belongings without my consent. What's cold is valuing my brother's marriage over my years of hard work." "We're not arguing about this anymore," my father declared, attempting to reassert control. "The decision has been made with the family's best interests in mind." "No, it hasn't," I said firmly. "It was made with Jackson and Stephanie's interests in mind at my expense. And it doesn't matter anyway because it's not your decision to make. This is my house, and I decide who lives here." "You would choose property over family?" my mother asked, her voice quivering with what seemed like practiced emotion. "Is that really the kind of person you've become?" "I'm not choosing property over family," I clarified. "I'm choosing respect for my boundaries and my rights. You're the ones who created this false dichotomy." "This is so like you," Stephanie interjected. "Always putting yourself first, never thinking about what others need." "That's not fair," I replied. "I've supported this family in countless ways, but giving up my home is not a reasonable ask." "So what now?" Jackson demanded. "You're just going to throw us out. Where are we supposed to go?" "The same place you were living before you decided to take my house," I answered simply. "Your current apartment or another one you can afford, or Mom and Dad's place if they're so concerned about your housing situation." My father stepped forward, his expression stern. "Amaya, I'm very disappointed in your attitude. This isn't how we raised you to behave." "You raised me to work hard for what I want," I reminded him. "You raised me to stand up for myself. That's exactly what I'm doing." By threatening to call the police on your own family, my mother asked, tears welling in her eyes. How could you even consider such a thing? I don't want to call anyone, I said truthfully. I want you all to respect my home and my rights. I want you to stop packing my belongings and accept that I'm not moving. But we've already signed the lease, my father argued. The first month's rent is paid. That was your choice made without consulting me, I pointed out. The consequences of that choice are yours to deal with, not mine. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room as my family seemed to finally realize I wasn't going to back down. The dynamic had shifted. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I wasn't seeking their approval or acceptance of my decisions. I was simply stating boundaries and expecting them to be respected. After a moment, Jackson broke the silence. You're really going to let a house come between you and your family? Is that worth it to you? I'm not letting anything come between us, I clarified. You are by refusing to respect my right to my own home. And yes, standing up for myself is absolutely worth it. What if we refuse to leave? Stephanie challenged, crossing her arms. What if we just keep packing? I looked at her directly, then at each member of my family in turn. Then I will call the police and report that people are attempting to remove my belongings from my home without my permission. I don't want to do that, but I will if you force my hand. You wouldn't, my mother whispered. I would, I confirmed, picking up my phone again. This is my home. I've worked too hard for it to let anyone take it away, even you. Something in my voice or expression must have convinced them I was serious, because the atmosphere in the room changed perceptibly. My father's authoritative posture faltered slightly. My mother glanced at the half-packed box in front of her with uncertainty. Jackson and Stephanie exchanged worried looks. You're really willing to call the police on your own family? My father asked, his tone now more incredulous than commanding. I'm willing to protect what's mine, I replied simply. I'm hoping it won't come to that, but the choice is yours. I held up my phone, my finger hovering over the keypad. It was a moment of truth for all of us. Would they respect my boundaries, or would I need to enforce them more drastically? After what felt like an eternity, my father finally sighed heavily. Fine, we'll stop packing for tonight. But this conversation isn't over, Amaya. The conversation about who lives in my house is absolutely over, I clarified. There's nothing more to discuss on that topic. You've changed, my mother said sadly. You used to understand the importance of family. I still do, I assured her. But families should support each other's successes, not try to take them away. Reluctantly, my parents began to step away from the boxes they had been filling. Jackson and Stephanie remained defiant, however. This is so unfair, Stephanie muttered. We really need this house. But it's not yours to take, I reminded her gently but firmly. Come on, Stephanie, Jackson said, finally taking her hand. We should go. As they moved toward the door, I heard Stephanie whisper to him, She can't just throw us out like this. We should call someone ourselves. That whispered conversation made me realize this wasn't truly over. They might have stopped packing for the moment, but they hadn't accepted my decision. They might return tomorrow or the next day when I was at work, or otherwise unable to defend my property. I made a quick decision and redialed Diana's number. Diana, it's Amaya again. They've stopped packing for now, but I don't think they've accepted that they can't move me out. What's the next step to legally protect myself? Diana's advice was clear and practical. Document everything, formally request in writing that they cease their attempts to relocate me, and if necessary, file for a temporary restraining order to prevent them from entering my property without permission. You might also want to call the non-emergency police line, she suggested. Have an officer come by to officially warn them that what they're attempting is illegal. Sometimes hearing it from law enforcement makes the reality sink in more effectively. I thanked her and hung up, turning back to my family who were watching me with various expressions of hurt, anger, and disbelief. I've been advised to call the police non-emergency line and have an officer come explain the legal situation to all of you, I informed them. I'd rather not do that, but I need to know that when you leave tonight, you won't come back tomorrow to continue this plan when I'm not here. You'd really bring the police into a family matter, my father asked, his voice low with disappointment. This stopped being just a family matter when you tried to take my home, I replied. Now it's also a legal matter. I dialed the non-emergency number before anyone could object further. When the dispatcher answered, I calmly explained the situation. My family had attempted to pack up my belongings and move me out of my own home without my consent, and while they had temporarily stopped, I was concerned they might return to continue their efforts. The dispatcher was sympathetic and professional, assuring me that an officer would be dispatched to my address within the hour. As I ended the call, the reality of what was happening seemed to finally hit my family. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. This was me asserting my legal rights as a homeowner. I can't believe you actually did that, my mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. Your own family. I can't believe you tried to take my house, I countered softly. Your own daughter. We sat in tense silence for the next 40 minutes, no one quite knowing what to say. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken accusations and hurt feelings. Part of me wanted to rescind the call to find some way to smooth things over, as I had done so many times before in family conflicts. But a stronger part knew this was necessary. The line had to be drawn clearly and firmly. When the doorbell rang, I rose to answer it. 2 police officers stood on my porch, professional and courteous. Good evening, ma'am. I'm Officer Garcia, and this is Officer Patel. We received a call about a property dispute. I invited them in and explained the situation as objectively as I could. I owned the house, had the deed and mortgage in my name only, and my family had been attempting to pack up my belongings to move me to an apartment against my will. Officer Garcia listened attentively, then addressed my family. Is this accurate? You were attempting to relocate the homeowner without her consent. My father attempted to explain their reasoning about family needs and resources, but Officer Garcia gently cut him off. Sir, regardless of family relationships, this residence legally belongs to, he glanced at me. Amaya Thompson, I supplied. To Ms. Thompson, he continued. Only she has the legal right to decide who lives here and what happens to the property within it. Attempting to remove her or her belongings without her express permission could constitute criminal trespassing and potentially theft. We're her parents, my mother protested. We were trying to help organize a family housing situation. I understand family dynamics can be complicated, Officer Patel said kindly but firmly. However, the law is quite clear. As an adult homeowner, Ms. Thompson has the sole authority over this property. Any attempt to force her to relocate against her will, even by family members, is not legal. So what are you saying? Jackson asked defensively. I'm saying that if Ms. Thompson asks you to leave her property, you must comply, Officer Garcia explained. And any future attempts to remove her belongings without her permission could result in criminal charges. The official statement of what I had been trying to tell them all evening finally seemed to penetrate. My father's shoulders slumped slightly. My mother dabbed at her tears with a tissue. Jackson and Stephanie exchanged glances that mixed anger with resignation. Furthermore, Officer Patel added, if you've signed any lease agreements in Ms. Thompson's name without her consent, that could potentially constitute identity fraud, which is a serious offense. We were just trying to help, my father mumbled. I understand, sir, Officer Garcia replied. But the appropriate way to help is to ask first and respect the answer you receive. After confirming that I felt safe and didn't need further assistance, the officers prepared to leave. Before they did, Officer Patel turned to me. Ms. Thompson, would you like us to stay while your family gathers their belongings and leaves? Or do you feel comfortable handling that on your own? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Did I trust my family enough to leave peacefully, or did I need official protection? Even for that, I looked at the people who had raised me, who had shaped my values and supported my dreams, who had nonetheless tried to take away something precious to me. In their faces, I no longer saw the determination of earlier, but rather a mixture of hurt, embarrassment, and dawning awareness of the line they had crossed. I think we'll be all right now, I said finally. Thank you for coming. The officers nodded, handed me a card with their contact information, and advised me to call immediately if I had any further concerns. As the door closed behind them, I turned back to face my family. "I think it's time for everyone to go," I said quietly but firmly. Without much further argument, they gathered their personal belongings. My mother attempted to hug me before leaving, but I stepped back, not yet ready for that reconciliation. "We only wanted what was best for the family," she whispered. "Next time remember that I'm part of this family too," I replied, "and my needs and rights matter just as much as anyone else's." One by one, they filed out the door. Jackson paused at the threshold, looking back at me with a mixture of anger and something else, perhaps respect, however reluctant. "I never thought you'd stand up to them like that," he said quietly. "Neither did I admitted. "But I guess we all have our limits." When the door finally closed behind them, I stood alone in my entryway, surrounded by half-packed boxes containing pieces of my life. The house felt eerily quiet after the emotional storm that had just passed through it. I slid down against the wall until I was sitting on the floor, emotions finally overwhelming me now that I was alone. I had stood my ground. I had protected my home. But in doing so, I had fundamentally altered my relationship with my family in ways that couldn't be undone. As tears streamed down my face, I wasn't sure whether I was crying from grief, or a complex mixture of both. What I did know with absolute clarity was that I had done the right thing. This house was mine, earned through years of hard work and sacrifice. No one had the right to take it from me, not even the people who had given me life. As I sat there amid the boxes that symbolized how disposable my family had considered my independence, I made a silent promise to myself from this day forward. I would never again allow anyone to devalue my choices or disrespect my boundaries regardless of our shared blood. The days following that confrontation were some of the most difficult of my life. My phone buzzed constantly with text messages and calls from various family members, ranging from angry accusations to tearful pleas to guilt-inducing reminders of all they had done for me over the years. My father's messages were brief and formal. "We need to discuss what happened. Call me when you've calmed down. This isn't how family treats each other." My mother's were more emotional and manipulative. "I cried all night thinking about how you treated us. After everything we've sacrificed for you. I never thought my own daughter would choose a house over her family." Jackson and Stephanie alternated between anger and attempts to restart negotiations. "You've always been selfish, but this is a new low. Maybe we could work out a compromise where we rent the house from you." I read each message but responded to none of them. I needed time to process what had happened, to understand the magnitude of the boundary that had been crossed and what it meant for my relationship with my family moving forward. The morning after the confrontation, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. I couldn't face client meetings or design consultations while my personal life was in such turmoil. Instead, I spent the day unpacking the boxes my family had filled, reclaiming my belongings and my space one item at a time. Each object I unwrapped felt like a small victory: a book returned to its shelf, a framed photograph restored to the mantel, a coffee mug back in its cabinet. These weren't just possessions. They were pieces of the life I had carefully built for myself, symbols of my independence and achievements. As I worked, Diana called to check on me. "How are you holding up?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "I'm still in shock, I think," I admitted. "I keep expecting to wake up and find out this was all some bizarre dream." "Unfortunately, family property disputes are all too common," she sighed. "People often believe blood relationships override legal ownership. It's good you stood your ground." "It doesn't feel good," I confessed. "It feels awful, actually, but I know it was necessary." "Have they tried to contact you since last night?" she asked. "Non-stop," I told her. "I haven't responded yet. I don't know what to say." "Take your time," she advised, "and consider changing your locks, just as a precaution." I hadn't thought of that, but once she mentioned it, the idea made perfect sense. My parents had a spare key to my house for emergencies. After what had happened, I couldn't trust that they wouldn't use it to continue their plan when I wasn't home. That afternoon, I called a locksmith who came promptly to change all the exterior locks. As he worked, he chatted pleasantly about the weather and local sports, a welcome distraction from the thoughts swirling in my head. When he finished, he handed me the new keys with a smile. "All set," he said. "No one's getting in without these now." I thanked him and closed the door, feeling both more secure and somehow more alone than ever before. The physical act of changing my locks symbolized a deeper change in my relationship with my family, a new level of distrust I had never imagined would be necessary. The next morning, I returned to work grateful for the routine and the distraction it provided. My colleagues noticed something was off, but I offered only vague explanations about family drama. The truth felt too raw, too personal to share in a professional setting. During my lunch break, I received a text from my cousin Rachel. "Just heard what happened from Aunt Ellen. Are you okay? Want to meet for coffee after work? No judgment, just support." Rachel had always been something of an outsider in our family, choosing a path similar to mine. Career-focused, independent, unmarried by choice. We hadn't been particularly close growing up, but in recent years had found common ground in our similar life choices. I accepted her invitation, and that evening we met at a quiet cafe a few blocks from my office. As soon as she saw me, she enveloped me in a warm hug. "I can't believe they did that," she said as we sat down with our coffees. "Aunt Ellen called my mom yesterday in tears, telling her version of the story." I knew immediately there had to be more to it. I shared the full story, feeling a weight lift as I finally verbalized the events to someone who understood the family dynamics at play. "They've always favored Jackson," Rachel observed, stirring her latte thoughtfully. "But this goes beyond favoritism. This was a complete disregard for your autonomy." "The worst part is that they genuinely seemed to believe they were helping," I said. "Like moving me out of my own home was some kind of favor." "Classic family manipulation," Rachel nodded. "Reframing exploitation as assistance to make you the ungrateful one for refusing." Her understanding was validating in a way I desperately needed. For the first time since the confrontation, I felt like I wasn't crazy for standing my ground. "What now?" I asked her. "I can't imagine Thanksgiving this year." She smiled wryly. "Join the Black Sheep Club. Some of us have been skipping family holidays for years. It's actually quite liberating." We talked for hours, Rachel sharing her own experiences with setting boundaries in our family, and the backlash she had weathered as a result. By the time we parted, I felt less alone in my situation, more confident in my decision to protect my home and my boundaries. The next day, my parents escalated their efforts involving other family members in what was quickly becoming an all-out campaign to pressure me into compliance. Aunts, uncles, and even my grandmother called to express their disappointment in my behavior. "Family helps family," my grandmother repeated, echoing my parents' refrain. "Your brother needs that house more than you do." "Grandma, would you give up your home because someone else wanted it?" I asked gently. "That's different," she insisted. "I'm an old woman. You're young and single." Each conversation followed a similar pattern, with family members dismissing my right to my property based on my marital status or presumed future needs. Each reinforced what I was beginning to recognize as a pattern throughout my life. My achievements and choices were consistently valued less than my brother's more traditional path. When my uncle suggested I was being hysterical about just a house, I finally reached my breaking point. "It's not just a house," I told him firmly. "It's my home. It represents years of hard work and sacrifice. And I'm not being hysterical, I'm setting a reasonable boundary. I wouldn't expect you to give up your home, and I deserve the same respect." After hanging up, I made a decision I would temporarily block all family numbers except for Rachel's. The constant pressure and guilt trips were taking a toll on my mental health and preventing me from processing what had happened in my own time and way. That weekend, friends from work heard about my situation and showed up at my door with wine takeout and supportive ears. Sophia, my closest colleague, was particularly outraged on my behalf. "I can't believe they thought they could just move you out like that," she fumed, as she poured generous glasses of wine for everyone. "Who does that?" Family who think they own you, replied Marcus, another coworker. My parents tried to dictate my career choice well into my 30s. Not the same scale, but similar entitlement. As we sat in my living room, sharing stories of boundary violations and family expectations, I felt a different kind of kinship forming. These people respected my choices, valued my independence, and supported my right to protect what I had earned. In many ways, they were demonstrating what family should be. You know what? Sophia said as the evening wound down. We should help you reclaim this space. Make it even more yours. Paint party next weekend. Her suggestion sparked an immediate chorus of agreement. My friends were offering not just emotional support, but practical help in reinforcing my ownership of my home. The gesture brought tears to my eyes. I would love that, I said, looking around at these people who had shown up for me without question or judgment. True to their word, the following Saturday, my friends arrived with paint cans, brushes, drop cloths, and boundless enthusiasm. We spent the day transforming my living room from the neutral beige I had inherited from the previous owners to a warm terracotta that had always felt more like me. As we worked, laughed, and shared more stories, I felt the house becoming truly mine in a deeper way. Each brushstroke was an affirmation: this is my space, my sanctuary, my achievement. No one could take it from me or diminish its value. That evening, exhausted but satisfied with our work, we ordered pizza and collapsed in the newly painted room. Looking around at these paint-spattered friends who had given up their weekend to help me reclaim my space, I felt a profound gratitude and a new understanding of what supportive relationships should look like. Thank you all, I said simply. This means more than I can express. That's what real family does, Sophia replied, raising her beer bottle in a toast. They build you up, not tear you down. Her words resonated deeply. Perhaps family wasn't defined by blood alone, but by respect, support, and celebration of each other's successes, rather than competition or exploitation. In the weeks that followed, I began therapy to process the family dynamics that had led to such a dramatic violation of my boundaries. My therapist, Dr. Levine, helped me recognize patterns that had been present throughout my life. Your family seems to have different expectations for you versus your brother, she observed during our third session. Have you noticed this in other situations before the house incident? As we explored this question, countless examples emerged. My brother's career changes were supported financially and emotionally, while my stable career path was often dismissed as playing it safe. His relationships were celebrated with enthusiasm, while my choice to remain single was treated as a failure or a phase. His needs were consistently prioritized, while mine were considered optional or selfish. What you're describing is a common dynamic in families with different gender expectations, Dr. Levine explained. Often daughters are expected to be accommodating and selfless, while sons are encouraged to pursue their own goals and needs. This framework helped me understand that the house incident wasn't an isolated event, but the culmination of a lifelong pattern. The realization was both painful and liberating. It wasn't my imagination, and it wasn't my fault. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, Doctor, Levine assured me. It's necessary for healthy relationships. The people who resist your boundaries the most are often the ones who benefited from you not having any. Armed with this new understanding, I finally felt ready to respond to my family. Not with anger or defensiveness, but with clarity and firm boundaries. I composed an email to my parents, Jackson and Stephanie. I've taken time to process what happened and how it made me feel. The attempt to move me out of my own home without my consent was deeply hurtful and disrespectful. It showed a fundamental disregard for my autonomy, my hard work, and my right to make my own choices about my life and property. I am not willing to give up my home. This boundary is non-negotiable. I am also not willing to continue relationships where my needs and rights are considered less important than others based on my marital status or gender. If you wish to have a relationship with me moving forward, I need acknowledgement of the boundary violation that occurred and a commitment to respect my boundaries in the future. I am open to having this conversation when you're ready to approach it with respect for my perspective. Until then, I need space to heal from this breach of trust. I sent the email without expectation, knowing that it might be met with more anger or manipulation. To my surprise, the first response came from Jackson 2 days later. Amaya, I've been thinking about what happened. While I still think the house would be perfect for us, I shouldn't have expected you to give up something you worked so hard for. Stephanie and I have found an apartment we can afford in a decent neighborhood. It's not ideal, but it's a start. I'm sorry for how things went down. His apology wasn't perfect, but it acknowledged my right to my property, which was a significant shift from his previous position. My parents' response took longer a week of silence before my mother called. We still think you're being unnecessarily difficult, she began. But we shouldn't have gone behind your back. We should have talked to you first. It wasn't the full acknowledgement I had hoped for, but it was a start. The conversation that followed was tense but civil, with clearer boundaries established than had ever existed in our relationship before. I love you, Mom, I said toward the end of the call. But I need you to understand that my life choices are valid even when they're different from what you would choose for me. My independence isn't a failure or a phase, it's a deliberate choice that brings me fulfillment. I just want you to be happy, she sighed. I am happy, I assured her. My career, my home, my friends, they bring me joy. I need you to see that and respect it. There was a long pause before she replied, I'll try. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a beginning. The path to rebuilding trust would be long and likely challenging, but the foundation for a healthier relationship was being laid. 6 months have passed since the night I came home to find my parents packing up my life. In that time, much has changed both in my home and in my relationships with family and friends. The house itself feels more truly mine than ever before. After that first painting party with my friends, I was inspired to continue the transformation. Room by room, I've replaced the generic decor with colors, textures, and arrangements that reflect my personality and taste. The home office where Stephanie had planned to create a nursery is now a bright creative space with an ergonomic desk setup and inspiration boards covering one wall. The spare bedroom has become a cozy guest room where friends can stay when visiting, complete with a small writing desk and a comfortable reading chair by the window. Each change, however small, has been an affirmation of my ownership and a reclamation of space that was nearly taken from me. There's a different feeling when I walk through the front door now, a sense of security and pride that goes beyond mere property ownership. This house represents a battle I fought and won, not just for the physical space, but for my right to define my own life on my terms. My relationship with my family has evolved into something I never could have imagined before the confrontation. The immediate aftermath was painful, with limited contact and cautious interactions when we did speak. Gradually, however, something unexpected began to emerge, a more honest and authentic connection based on who we actually are rather than who we were expected to be. Jackson and Stephanie eventually found a 2-bedroom apartment they could afford. It's not the spacious house they wanted, but it's comfortable and within their budget. More importantly, it's theirs earned through their own efforts, rather than taken from someone else. I visited them there twice for dinner, and while there's still an occasional undercurrent of tension, we're slowly rebuilding a relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. My parents have shown surprising growth, though not without stumbles along the way. They attended 3 family therapy sessions with me, initially resistant, but eventually engaging with the process. During the second session, my father had a breakthrough moment when the therapist asked him to articulate why he believed Jackson deserved my house more than I did. Well, he's married, starting a family, my father began before falling silent as he realized the implications of his words. And that makes his life choices more valuable than Amaya's, the therapist asked gently. My father looked at me, then really looked at me, perhaps for the first time, and I saw something shift in his expression. No, he said quietly. I suppose it doesn't. That moment didn't instantly repair years of unequal treatment, but it opened a door to more honest conversations about expectations and respect. My mother has had a harder time adjusting to our new dynamic, occasionally slipping into old patterns of subtle criticism about my single status or suggesting I work too much. But when I point these comments out calmly and directly, She's learning to catch herself. Old habits, she'll say with a small, self-conscious smile. I'm trying. And she is trying, which is more than I would have expected 6 months ago. The most profound changes, however, have been within myself. Standing up to my family that night catalyzed a transformation in how I view myself and my relationships. I've become more discerning about who I allow into my life and what behaviors I tolerate from them. I've discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed: the ability to say no without guilt and to establish boundaries without apology. This newfound assertiveness has extended beyond family relationships into other areas of my life. At work, I negotiated a promotion and substantial raise, presenting my accomplishments with confidence and clarity. In friendships, I've become better at expressing my needs and limits, resulting in deeper connections with fewer people rather than superficial relationships with many. I've even started dating someone, a fellow designer I met at a conference 3 months ago. Kevin respects my independence and admires my career success rather than seeing it as competition or a threat. When I told him about the house incident, his immediate response was outrage on my behalf, followed by thoughtful questions about how it had affected me. There was no subtle suggestion that I should have compromised or put family first, no implication that my single status made my home somehow less legitimately mine. On our fourth date, as we walked through a local art festival, he asked, "Would you show me your house sometime? I'd love to see the space you fought so hard to keep." When I did bring him home the following weekend, he walked through each room with genuine interest, commenting on the design choices and personal touches that made the space uniquely mine. "This place really reflects you," he said as we sat on my back patio watching the sunset. "Strong, creative, thoughtful. I can see why you refuse to give it up." His understanding reinforced something I had been learning through therapy. Love shouldn't require sacrificing yourself or diminishing your achievements. Real support means celebrating each other's successes and respecting each other's boundaries. Perhaps the most surprising outcome of this whole ordeal has been the strengthening of friendships and the creation of a chosen family that supports me in ways my biological family sometimes cannot. Sophia, Marcus, and the other friends who showed up with paintbrushes that Saturday have become regular fixtures in my life and my home. We gather for dinner parties, movie nights, and sometimes just quiet evenings of conversation and connection. Rachel, my once distant cousin, has become something of a mentor in navigating family dynamics. Her years of experience setting boundaries with our extended family have provided invaluable guidance as I establish my own. We meet monthly for brunch, sharing stories and strategies with humor and understanding. Diana, whose legal advice saved my home that night, has moved from professional acquaintance to trusted friend. Her clear-eyed perspective helps me distinguish between reasonable family expectations and boundary violations, a distinction I'm still learning to recognize. Looking back on that night 6 months ago, I can now see it as a painful but necessary turning point. Had I capitulated, given up my home to keep the peace, I would have established a precedent that my needs, my work, and my choices were less valuable than others. The ripple effects would have extended far beyond property ownership, reinforcing a lifetime pattern of unequal expectations and treatment. Instead, by standing firm, I changed not just the outcome of that specific situation, but the fundamental dynamics of my family relationships. The message was clear: I am an equal adult, with equal rights to respect and self-determination. My life choices, though different from the traditional path my brother followed, are valid and valuable. The most profound lesson I've learned through this experience is the difference between being selfish and being self-respecting. For too long, I had accepted the narrative that asserting my own needs or protecting my own interests was somehow selfish or ungenerous. I now understand that healthy boundaries aren't selfish. They're necessary for authentic relationships built on mutual respect, rather than obligation or exploitation. True family connection should never require one person to diminish themselves for another's benefit. It should involve mutual support, celebration of each other's unique paths, and respect for each other's autonomy. Sometimes paradoxically, setting firm boundaries is the only way to create the possibility for this kind of authentic connection. As I sit here in my living room surrounded by the colors and objects I've chosen to reflect who I am, I feel a deep sense of peace. The house around me is more than walls and a roof. It's a testament to my journey, my values, and my right to define my own life. It's a sanctuary I created and fought for, a physical manifestation of the boundaries I've learned to establish in all areas of my life. The road ahead with my family will likely continue to have bumps and challenges as we navigate our new, more honest relationship. Old patterns don't disappear overnight, and there will be moments of backsliding and renegotiation. But the foundation has shifted from obligation and unspoken expectations to a more conscious and respectful engagement with each other as the adults we actually are rather than the roles we were assigned. I no longer fear standing up for myself or speaking my truth, even when it creates temporary discomfort. The temporary discomfort of confrontation is far preferable to the permanent erosion of self that comes from constantly yielding your own needs and rights to keep others happy. If you're facing a similar situation where family or friends are crossing your boundaries or devaluing your choices, I hope my story gives you courage. Your life is yours to design, your successes are yours to celebrate, and your boundaries are yours to establish and defend. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's an act of self-respect that ultimately creates the possibility for healthier, more authentic relationships with everyone in your life. What boundaries have you had to set with loved ones? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a way that felt difficult but necessary? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you want to hear more stories about navigating challenging family dynamics and finding your own voice. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your needs and boundaries matter just as much as anyone else's.